Shea Gallagher, an architect with Supercool. We're a Toronto-based practice focused on housing across all scales, from small laneway suites up to large master plan communities, and everything in between. And of course, it's the in-between which is the focus of today's discussion. Toronto's housing landscape has become sharply polarized. We have houses and we have towers. And really it's that in-between space where we're lacking the duplexes, the triplexes, the small-scale apartment buildings, the walk-ups. And that's really formed the backbone of many vibrant cities in other parts of North America. Here, however, these types, they've been overlooked. They've been overlooked by policy frameworks, they've been overlooked by financing tools, and even public imagination. But as I think we've seen here today, that is starting to change in the city. And I think it's great to see we as architects, developers, designers in this room, I think we have a real role to play here in accelerating that change. So where are we at now? The mid-rise guidelines. So the mid-rise guidelines were introduced first back in 2010. And really, these put a focus on facilitating and encouraging density along our primary arterial roads, so our avenues. However, there were problems with the mid-rise guidelines. Really, the rules were too prescriptive. While as an architect, I love working on these buildings. This is a project we finished last year in Leslieville. It's a 6-story apartment building, 47 units. The form, it supports a diverse range of unit types. We've got a lot of different 2 beds, 3 beds in here. A lot of the units have large expansive outdoor terraces. And it really fosters a sense of community within the building. At 47 units, the residents really do get to know one another. And then introducing this mixed-use project into the community, it also then animates and brings energy to the public realm and the street. But as many of you here know today, these are really difficult buildings to build. They're really difficult to underwrite, and they're really difficult to execute. And the timelines are similar to much larger developments. Despite the city's intent behind the guidelines, the numbers haven't really followed. So from when the guidelines were introduced in 2010 up to 2023, there were only 136 of these buildings completed in Toronto, which, given the scale of our city and the rate of growth during that period, is really a very small return. And the reasons for this is due to high land costs, unpredictable construction costs with this type of building, and also a policy framework that, rather than bringing clarity, it introduced complexity to the approvals process. Good news, however, is, of course, the city have heard this message. So as of last year, they have modified the mid-rise guidelines to encourage much more of this type of development. They've simplified the built form rules, so there'll be less terracing in the new guidelines. And there's also a push towards changing the approvals process for these buildings. So increasing the amount of as-of-right permissions for this building type along our avenues. So this initiative, along with the major streets policy that NAMA outlined, we see these as really positive steps forward. The mid-rise guidelines address our primary arterial roads, our avenues throughout the city, and the major streets addresses the secondary arterial roads, or the major streets, to introduce meaningful as-of-right density. However, we do think there's an untapped third area that we'd really push policymakers to look at. And we call these transition zones. So essentially the current framework is we have our avenue, we have our mid-rise building, which is in a mixed-use commercial zone, and then behind that building, we have single-family neighborhoods. However, if we think of these transition zones as lands adjacent to the avenues, but designated neighborhoods, there's often parcels that don't fit neatly into either planning category. They're often irregular or underutilized and can be overlooked. However, when approached thoughtfully, these sites can support mid-rise buildings that act as a bridge, transitioning from the scale envisioned of the taller development down to the lower scale of the existing neighborhood. Up until this point, the city have been thinking more of transition as being within a building, and that's why we have a lot of those terrace buildings. But we think fundamentally that's the wrong approach. We think we need to simplify the buildings themselves and achieve transition through multiple buildings and be more flexible in our land use zoning. So last year, as part of the city's expanding housing options in neighbourhoods, we led a pilot project with Creatio and with the support of Councillor Bradford, who was here this morning. And the idea was simple. Use the major streets built form as transition. Stepping down from scales of avenues to fine-grained single-family streets. A 6-story building in this context does more than just add units. It completes the urban fabric. It animates the sidewalk and creates a respectful edge to the existing neighbourhood. So the pilot project itself, it's located at 72 Amroth. This is just southeast of Woodbine and Danforth. To the north of the site is mixed-use commercial zone on an avenue, currently consisting of retail, low-rise retail, but it is envisioned that that strip will redevelop into taller mid-rise like we see to the left of the image. The site itself is a green pea surface parking lot, a kind of T-shape, and then to the south of the site is established single-family neighbourhoods, 1 to 2 story houses, mature tree canopy. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the primary building, the 6-story built form. We also incorporate some ancillary buildings, which I'll touch on towards the end. But the main focus here is more about that missing middle apartment building. So the site itself is 55 feet frontage by approximately 150 feet deep. We started by looking at the context and understanding how we would set a buildable footprint. So to the south of us in the neighbourhood, the existing street wall was around 3 meters from the property line. So we struck a line from the houses and we brought that through our site, establishing our front yard setback. We then set side yard setbacks, applying 2.1 to the south, 1.5 to the north, so averaging that 1.8 per the major streets policy. And it resulted in a building footprint that was 12.8 meters deep by 25 meters, or 12.8 meters wide rather, by 25 meters deep. And the 25 again is taking that built form typology from the major streets. We then looked at demising this floor plate to provide a diverse mix of units. So we've got 2 beds towards the rear, and then we've got 3 units in the front, a 1 bed on each corner with a studio in between. We have a central corridor with 2 exit stairs. There's been great discussions about single exits. This could be an option for that, but our brief was really to design within the current OBC as it stands today. So with those unit layouts, again, the focus here is to simplify the building. So we took those structural grid lines, we took the plumbing, and we extrude that volume straight up with no step backs. It's just a simple 6-story extrusion. We then wrap that in a skin, and we then introduce openings into the facade corresponding to the suite layouts. So primary windows facing out towards the street and out towards the rear, with on the flanking walls, we've got secondary windows for bedrooms or windows into the common corridor as well. I'm going to come back to that plan. I want to just touch on the floor plan first. So this is our typical residential plan. So to the left of the image is Amroth. So that's the front of the building. The right is the rear of the building. So the corridor itself, we get windows at each end of the corridor, bringing light into the circulation space. You'll notice with this floor plate, all the bedrooms are on the envelope. So in larger mid-rise buildings, we end up quite often with borrowed light bedrooms where they're buried towards the back of the unit. And that's really a function of the deep floor plates. But with this building type, we can push all the bedrooms to the exterior, allowing for windows into the bedroom, and allowing us to cross-ventilate the unit, which our previous speakers were touching on. So really utilizing those lower tech systems to ventilate. Pop back first. So after we did the initial planning, we then worked with a mass timber fabricator. So there's a company called Element 5, and they do a lot of this mass timber fabrication particularly around affordable housing. And we looked at how we could optimize our design to really allow for off-site fabrication and also to use a mobile crane. So we see these projects, these are not suitable for tower cranes. These need to be buildable with mobile cranes that can pull up on the street, lift panels off the bed of a truck and drop them in. So this diagram here shows the mobile crane pulling up on Amroth, the truck would be in front, and it's sized appropriately that the arm of the crane can reach towards the back with a single CLT panel, and the panel would span the full width of the building with interim pickup points on the demising walls. All of the demising walls and the exterior walls would be panelized wood stud. So this is we'll call it a hybrid mass timber building. So it's using mass timber for cores and floors, but it's using stick frame for its load-bearing walls. And that was really a cost-saving measure, using less material in the building. And this is the resulting site plan overall. So Amroth is along the bottom of the image here. We have the front entrance into the 6-story apartment building, and we got 3 units on the ground floor. And then along the side, where we increase that side yard setback, we have an exterior walkway that brings you towards the back of the site, where we have 2 ancillary buildings on each side of this T-shaped site. I mentioned earlier it was kind of an unusual shaped site. So really, to maximize the benefit of this site, we introduced these 2 other buildings. These are 3-story buildings, and they're essentially stacked townhouses with bigger units. So we've got family 3-bedroom units here. 2 on the left have rear yards. But what's nice about this is it really creates this central courtyard space for all the residents. So the courtyard is animated by these doors of units that spill out on 3 sides of the courtyard. And then the other side of the courtyard is where we had large existing trees that we wanted to preserve as part of the scheme. So it becomes framed in on all 4 sides. This is a view from the front. So we're on Amroth. We see the existing houses to the left. To the right of our building is where we're envisioning the eventual build-out of Danforth, mid-rise built form. And this image shows how we can use this building as that transitional piece. So we use simple built form on this site. We simplify the built form along the avenue. And this transitional zone makes the transition between the two, from neighborhood to mixed-use commercial. And then really setting this in its context. So really looking at the context, there's a strong 2-story datum along the street. So we struck that line, we pulled it across the facade, and below that datum, we're using brick. We're taking design cues from the neighborhood. So there's a lot of bay windows, porches, canopies. So we draw those elements into the base of this building. And once we get above that datum, we then simplify the expression. It's just simple panelized construction with large cut openings and Juliets out onto the street. This is a view from the pedestrian level along Amroth. So this is the front entrance into the building. You can see some of that articulation in the base of the building that I was referencing that picks up on cues from the neighborhood. And then just to the left of this image, that's the outdoor pedestrian walkway that brings you back to that rear courtyard where we have the 2 ancillary buildings. And now this is a view from the courtyard looking the opposite direction. So we see the rear of our apartment building. It has grade-related units that spill out into the courtyard. And on the right-hand side, we see the larger townhouse units that open up into that courtyard. So to wrap up, this pilot project is just one example of what missing middle can look like in Toronto. It's modest in scale, but it's ambitious in its intent. It shows that we can add meaningful density without compromising the character of our neighborhoods. We can create multi-unit homes that are livable, family-friendly, and contextual. But to make this type of project more common, we need more than good design. We need further policy change. We need policy that will support transitional infill. And we also need public support, which starts by showing people that density can be beautiful. So I'll leave you with this. What if every block had one of these? How different would our city feel? Thank you.